My name is Marjorie. There are moments in life that arrive not with a thunderclap, but with a quiet shift in the air, a subtle rearrangement of the familiar that leaves you standing on slightly different ground. For me, one such moment began with the faint scent of my husband's sandalwood soap lingering in the morning air and a casual scroll through sun-dappled images on my phone. It was how I learned I'd been quietly uninvited, erased from a family tradition aboard a vessel that, in a twist of painful irony, was mine. The sting wasn't in the exclusion itself, sharp though it was. It was in the sudden, stark illumination of all the times I had sat at their tables, offered my smile, and believed in a belonging that, perhaps, had only ever existed in my own hopeful heart. The truth, when it finally surfaced, was a complicated thing. It was mine, undeniably, yet it seemed to unsettle them far more than the comfortable illusion they had so carefully constructed. I always begin my mornings with a quiet ritual: coffee, brewed just so, cradled in a pale blue ceramic mug, its glaze worn smooth by countless mornings like this. The kitchen, with its honey-toned wooden cabinets and the wide window overlooking our small herb garden, is usually my sanctuary. Lyle, my husband, had already departed for an early consultation, leaving behind the comforting scent of his aftershave and the slight disarray of a hastily eaten piece of toast. I was idly scrolling through my phone, the screen casting a cool light on my face, half attending to emails and the day's gentle unfolding, when a vibrant post from Lyle's niece, Chloe, caught my eye. It was one of those short, looping videos, champagne flutes clinking, sunlight glinting off sparkling water, the sleek white railings of a yacht in the background. The caption, peppered with joyful emojis, read, "Seabrook Cove bound. Annual Preston family sale starts soon. So excited for sun, sea, and family. Hashtag Preston Traditions, hashtag Making Memories." My thumb hovered, a sudden stillness falling over me. The annual Preston family yacht trip. A tradition heralded with much fanfare, a carefully curated display of family unity and generational prosperity. I'd been invited twice since Lyle and I married 7 years ago. The first time, I'd innocently suggested varying the itinerary to include a quieter, less ostentatious cove I knew. The suggestion was met with polite, icy smiles. The second time, Valora, Lyle's older sister and the self-appointed matriarch of Preston Traditions, had made it abundantly clear, through a series of subtle exclusions and pointed remarks about true family understanding, that my presence was tolerated, not integral. I clicked on Chloe's profile, then another and another. Familiar faces smiled back at me from the screen. Valora, her lips curved in a serene, proprietary smile, her husband, David, ever affable, Ophelia, Lyle's mother, holding a mimosa aloft, her expression one of benign indulgence. Even Lyle's quiet cousin, Arthur, with his new, beaming fiancé. Everyone who constituted the core Preston family. Everyone, it seemed, except me. There was a family group chat, once grandly named Preston Ocean Legacy, later shortened to Preston Sales. Lyle had added me when we were first married, a gesture that felt inclusive at the time. I'd been quietly removed a few years later, after a misunderstanding, or so it was framed, about seating arrangements at Ophelia's birthday dinner. It was a long, intricate story, best left undisturbed, like sediment at the bottom of a still pond. Still, a faint, foolish hope prompted me to check. No new chat. No messages. No email detailing departure times or packing lists. The coffee in my blue mug had grown tepid. My pulse wasn't racing. It was a slow, heavy beat, a dull acknowledgement of a truth I'd perhaps known for some time but hadn't allowed to fully surface. This wasn't an oversight. It was an omission, quiet and deliberate as a closing door. Later that afternoon, as I stood at the kitchen sink, the rhythmic splash of water a counterpoint to the turmoil in my chest, my phone chimed. A message from Valora. But it wasn't addressed to me. It was a forwarded screenshot of a group text, clearly sent to me by mistake, a digital slip of her usually meticulous fingers. The image showed a neatly typed list under the heading, Oriana, Final Cabin Allocations, Starboard Suites. A name had been neatly crossed out with a thin red line. My name. Beside it, penned in Valora's elegant script, was a new name, confirmed, Serena, Yoga and Wellness. Serena, Valora's current protege, a woman whose aura of tranquil superiority I found particularly grating, especially after she'd once mistaken me for Lyle's personal assistant at a charity luncheon. Below the list, a brief voice note from Valora, her tone light, almost lilting, just a tiny adjustment, darlings. I think the overall ambience on board will be much more harmonious this year. Harmonious. The word hung in the air, a silken veil over a sharp-edged reality. I placed the phone on the counter, my hand surprisingly steady. My jaw, however, ached with a familiar tension. That evening, I waited until dinner was nearly over. Lyle seemed preoccupied, his gaze flickering between his plate of roasted chicken and the stock market updates on his tablet. The scent of rosemary and lemon filled our dining room, a comforting aroma that usually eased the day's stresses. "Did you hear anything about your family's yacht trip this year?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral as I swirled the wine in my glass. He glanced up, a flicker of something. Surprise? Or just distraction? In his eyes. "Oh yes. Mom mentioned it last week. Said they were still working out the final details, the guest list." I tilted my head slightly. "Am I on that list, Lyle?" He frowned, finally putting down his fork. "Well, of course. Why wouldn't you be, Marjorie?" A small, tight smile touched my lips, one that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Just curious." He picked up his tablet again. "I'll ask Valora to send over the itinerary. She's coordinating, as usual." He wouldn't ask. He rarely did, especially if it involved questioning Valora's arrangements. After dinner, I washed the dishes slowly, methodically, the warm water a small comfort against my skin. The silence in the kitchen was profound, each unspoken word, each avoided glance, amplifying the hollowness I felt. Lying in bed that night, the gentle whir of the ceiling fan a hypnotic rhythm, my mind replayed a montage of slights, of quiet exclusions. The family brunches I'd learned about from Instagram stories, the holiday gatherings where my dietary preferences, shared in advance, were invariably forgotten. The conversations that would halt mid-sentence when I entered a room, only to resume with forced brightness on a new, innocuous topic. I wasn't entirely naive. I hadn't expected deep affection from Valora, whose world revolved around maintaining the Preston family's carefully polished image. But this, the deliberate erasure from a shared tradition, felt different. More pointed. More final. The most painful realization, however, wasn't their actions, but my own quiet complicity in allowing them to diminish me. At some point, one stops asking why they aren't included and begins to question why one ever tried so desperately to belong to a circle that clearly had no space for them. Before sleep finally claimed me, I reached for the linen-bound journal on my bedside table. In clear, steady script, I wrote, "Observe. Understand. Do not react from hurt. Act from truth." The following morning, a new text message from Valora appeared. It was a masterpiece of passive aggression, sweetness coating every carefully chosen word. "Dearest Marjorie, so dreadfully sorry, it seems in all the flurry of planning for the Oriana trip, we might have overlooked confirming your spot. It's just been one of those years, everything filling up so astonishingly fast. Such a shame. We'll have to have a lovely catch-up when we're back on shore. Hugs." V. Smiling face with smiling eyes. There it was. Her signature. A brief, breezy dismissal, adorned with emojis, leaving no room for discussion, no offer of rectification. Just a casual acknowledgement of my exclusion, framed as a charmingly regrettable oversight. I didn't reply. I couldn't trust myself to craft a response that wouldn't betray the quiet storm brewing within me. I read her message again, then set my phone aside and dressed for the day. My original plan had been a visit to the local botanical garden, a place of peace and beauty. Instead, I found myself back at the kitchen counter, the untouched coffee growing cold, staring out at the dew-kissed leaves of the basil and thyme. Mid-morning, an email notification chimed. It was from Seabrook Cove Charters, the company that managed the Oriana. Subject: Cabin Release Confirmation. Ref: Preston Charter YR7. I clicked it open, my heart giving a strange lurch. The email confirmed the successful processing of a cabin release request. The request, it stated, had been logged 3 days prior. Submitted by Valora Preston. So, her oversight had been a carefully orchestrated maneuver. I stared at the screen, the words blurring slightly, not from tears, but from a sudden, intense pressure behind my eyes, the kind that comes with seeing a painful truth laid bare. I printed the email, the paper emerging warm from the printer. One clean, crisp copy. I retrieved a simple, unmarked manila folder from the bottom drawer of my desk, a folder where I kept important, rarely consulted papers. This email would be its first new inhabitant. When Lyle returned home that evening, the setting sun cast long, melancholic shadows across our living room floor. He greeted me with a brief kiss, his mind still clearly on the day's business dealings. I waited until he had settled in his armchair with a glass of scotch before I spoke. "Valora texted me today." He looked up, a slight frown creasing his brow. "Oh, about the yacht trip, I presume?" "Yes, she said she forgot to reserve a spot for me." His frown deepened. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "That's unlike Valora. She's usually so meticulous with these things." "She called it a miscommunication," I offered, watching his face. "Well, perhaps it was just that," he said, a little too quickly. "You know how hectic these family arrangements can be. Wires get crossed." "It wasn't a miscommunication, Lyle," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I received a cancellation confirmation from the charter company. She submitted the request to release my cabin 3 days ago." He didn't meet my gaze immediately, his attention fixed on the swirling scotch, as if it held the answers he needed. "Well, I mean, perhaps she assumed, perhaps our plans had changed, or that we might not be able to make it this year." "We?" I echoed softly. He sighed, a sound of weary resignation. "Marjorie, let's not jump to the worst conclusions. There could be a simple explanation. She replaced my name with Serena's, Lyle. That's not a conclusion. It's a documented fact." He remained silent, and in that silence, heavy and fraught, I heard the echo of all the other times he had chosen the path of least resistance, the path that avoided confrontation with his family, regardless of the cost to me. Later that evening, after Lyle had retreated to his study, ostensibly to catch up on work, but more likely to escape the uncomfortable tension, I sat at our polished mahogany dining table. I opened my laptop, not to revisit painful memories or old grievances, but to create a new document. I titled it, "Patterns of Quiet Exclusion, a Personal Inventory." The list flowed with an unsettling ease. The wedding anniversary dinner for his parents where my invitation was lost in the mail. The family-only holiday photograph from which I was subtly angled out. The numerous times Valora had accidentally shared information with everyone but me, leaving me to piece things together from secondary sources. Each instance, taken alone, might have seemed trivial, a minor social gaffe. But woven together, they formed a tapestry of deliberate distancing. My jaw ached, not from anger, but from the strain of years spent absorbing these small, persistent dismissals. Just as I was about to close the laptop, a new email arrived. It wasn't from Valora, but from her assistant, a young woman named Clara, who had once contacted me about a potential catering collaboration that never materialized. The subject line was blank. The body of the email contained only a forwarded screenshot of another group message. This one was clearly an internal planning thread for the yacht trip. A message from Valora to an unidentified recipient read, "Don't worry about M. It's handled. She won't be joining. Focus on ensuring the wellness retreat elements are seamless. It's handled." For simple words, yet they landed with the force of a physical blow. I stared at the screen, the room growing darker around me as the last vestiges of daylight faded. Lyle was still in his study, the muffled sounds of a sports commentary drifting under the door. He was in his world, and I, it seemed, was entirely in mine. I stood, walked to my desk, and retrieved the manila folder. I printed Clara's email and the screenshot, adding them to the growing collection of quiet truths. This was never just about a cabin on a yacht. It was about respect, about visibility, about the slow, painful erosion of one's place until one questions if they ever truly had one. I sat on the edge of our bed, the folder resting in my lap. The word cancellation, in stark, impersonal lettering atop the charter company's email, seemed to pulse with a cold light. I'd read it countless times, but the full weight of it was only now settling in. The Oriana wasn't just a luxury vessel to me, it was a symbol, a deeply personal one. It was the first significant thing I had ever acquired entirely on my own, through my own efforts. Years ago, after a modest inheritance from a beloved grandaunt, I'd invested wisely, nurtured those funds through careful planning and a touch of daring, and eventually was able to purchase the yacht. It was a dream I'd harbored since childhood, a dream of freedom, of open waters, of a sanctuary that was truly mine. I remembered the day I signed the final papers, the scent of sea salt and possibility in the air. My hand had been steady, filled with a quiet sense of accomplishment, a feeling of stepping into a strength I hadn't fully known I possessed. Legally, for reasons of complex estate planning and at the gentle urging of our then accountant, Lyle's name was also on the ownership documents as a co-owner. Simpler for trusts, smoother for long-term management, the accountant had explained, and I, eager to share my joy and trusting in our partnership, had agreed. Down the road. Indeed. Within a year, the Oriana had been seamlessly absorbed into the Preston family narrative. It became Lyle's yacht, then, more grandly, the Preston family's flagship, a symbol of their enduring legacy. Valora, at a family gathering I now recalled with a pang of belated understanding, had raised her champagne flute and declared, "It's truly wonderful how the Oriana allows us to perpetuate our family traditions, to create lasting memories on our seas. It speaks to the heart of what it means to be a Preston." She then turned to me, her smile a thin, bright line, and "Marjorie, dear, it's so commendable how you support Lyle in these endeavors." Support Lyle. As if I were merely an appreciative spectator, not the silent architect of the very vessel upon which her legacy sailed. That memory, sharp and clear, was one of many. Valora had a peculiar talent for subtly appropriating things. Ideas for charity events I'd researched and proposed would later emerge as her own inspired initiatives. Recipes I'd shared would appear on her lifestyle blog attributed to an old family friend. Even design suggestions for their country house, which I'd offered in passing, were later credited to a high-end decorator. Each time, I'd told myself it wasn't worth the discomfort of a confrontation. Choose your battles wisely, I'd counseled my reflection. But I was beginning to understand that when you consistently cede ground, you eventually find yourself with nowhere left to stand. A few days prior, a notification had popped up on my phone, a memory from a social media platform. It was a clip from a local lifestyle program Valora had participated in some years back. She was seated on a plush white chaise lounge, the picture of serene elegance, discussing the importance of family traditions. "The Oriana," she'd said, her voice soft and imbued with carefully cultivated sentiment, "is more than just a boat. It's a sanctuary where our family connects, where we reinforce our bonds. It represents our continuity, our heritage, our story." Watching it again now, the words struck me with fresh force. This wasn't merely about being excluded from a pleasure trip. This was about being systematically written out of my own narrative, my own contribution erased from the story of something I had brought into existence. They weren't just trying to keep me off the yacht, they were attempting to sever my connection to its very essence. And the most painful part? I had, through my silence, through my desire for peace, inadvertently aided them. By not correcting their assumptions, by allowing Lyle to be the perceived benefactor, by nodding politely when Valora assigned roles and distributed praise as if she were the sole arbiter of family significance, I had allowed my own light to be dimmed. I rose from the bed, a new resolve hardening within me. I opened the antique chest at the foot of our bed, a piece that had belonged to my grandaunt, and retrieved a lacquered box. Inside, nestled amongst old letters and faded photographs, were the original purchase agreements for the Oriana, bank statements detailing the wire transfers, even the initial brochure from the yacht broker. Its pages filled with my handwritten notes and excited scribbles. I spread them out on the duvet, a tangible history of my endeavor. There was no dramatic outburst, no shedding of tears. Instead, below, steady current of determination began to flow through me, originating somewhere deep in my core, tightening and strengthening with each breath. "You tried to make me invisible," I whispered to the silent room, my fingers tracing the outline of my signature on the primary ownership document. "But you underestimated the power of quiet truth." The pre-trip dinner, a new addition to the annual ritual, was streamed live on Valora's meticulously curated social media profile. I didn't seek it out. The notification simply appeared on my tablet as I was attempting to read in the den, the sound of their distant laughter and clinking glasses an unwelcome intrusion. There they all were, bathed in the warm glow of candlelight, seated around an elegantly dressed table, Ophelia presiding with queenly grace, Valora radiant and in her element, David, Arthur, Chloe, and several other familiar Preston relations. Even Lyle's elderly Aunt Beatrice, who famously professed a lifelong aversion to sea travel, was present, a small, knowing smile on her lips. No one had breathed a word of this dinner to me. It wasn't an oversight, it was a deliberate, collective silence. Then Valora rose, tapping her glass lightly for attention. Her voice, when she spoke, was honeyed, laced with practiced emotion. As we gather tonight, on the eve of our family voyage, she began, her gaze sweeping the assembled faces, I'm reminded of what truly defines the Preston legacy. It isn't merely about tradition, but about the people who embrace that tradition, who carry it forward with intention and reverence. A chorus of appreciative murmurs. We are discerning, she continued, her eyes glistening, about who shares in this sacred space. We welcome only those who truly understand its significance, those whose presence enriches our shared story, rather than diminishes it. That carefully crafted phrase, rather than diminishes it, hung in the air, a perfectly aimed dart. I paused the video, rewound it, and listened again. Though no names were mentioned, the implication was crystal clear to anyone familiar with the family dynamics. And there, at the table, was Lyle, sipping his wine, his expression placid, offering no dissent. Later, when he emerged from his shower, toweling his hair, I played the clip for him. He watched, arms crossed, his face unreadable. When it ended, I simply looked at him. She actually said that was all I could manage, my voice flat. He rubbed his jaw, a gesture I'd come to recognize as one of discomfort. Valora enjoys a bit of drama, Marjorie. You know her. I'm not certain that's the exoneration you believe it to be. She was probably just trying to be eloquent. It's just a family dinner. No, Lyle. It was a statement. A public one. And you said nothing. I didn't write her speech, he countered, a defensive edge to his tone. But you endorsed it with your silence. His own silence in response was not defensive, but something far more disheartening, resigned. I nodded slowly, the weight of his passivity settling heavily in my heart. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't weep. I simply absorbed the painful clarity of his consistent inaction. Alone in the kitchen later, nursing a cup of chamomile tea I didn't really want, I found myself drawn to a box of old mementos I rarely opened. Inside, amongst faded invitations and forgotten greeting cards, was the original invite to Chloe's christening party, an event I'd been told was strictly immediate family only to later see photographs of distant cousins and Valora's then hairdresser in attendance. I remembered calling Valora that day, confused, asking if there had been a change of plans. She'd laughed, a light, dismissive sound. Oh, darling, was that this weekend? I completely forgot. I assumed you were out of town. I hadn't been. I'd sent a thoughtful gift weeks in advance. I held the invitation now, its embossed lettering a faint reminder of a pattern I could no longer afford to ignore. The next morning, I transcribed the relevant portion of Valora's dinner speech. I highlighted the sentence about those who enrich our shared story rather than diminish it. I slipped this, too, into the growing manila folder. Then, with a steady hand, I composed a brief text message to Valora. Your words about legacy at dinner were quite compelling. I look forward to discussing them further, in person. In Seabrook Cove. I pressed send. No emojis, no explanations. Just the words. She would understand. That afternoon, I arranged for a car service to Seabrook Cove. I didn't pack resort wear or evening gowns. I packed documents, printouts, photocopies. I packed the quiet, irrefutable truth. I wasn't just going on a trip, I was going to reclaim a part of myself I had allowed to be overshadowed for far too long. The drive to Seabrook Cove was quiet, the landscape blurring past my window in a soft watercolor wash of greens and blues. I didn't listen to music or try to distract myself. Instead, I focused on the steady rhythm of my own breathing, on the quiet resolve that had taken root within me. I was not fueled by anger, but by a profound, almost sorrowful clarity. This journey wasn't about revenge or confrontation in the traditional sense. It was about restoration, about gently but firmly reasserting my own narrative. My attire was chosen with care, a simple, well-cut linen dress in a shade of deep seafoam green, comfortable low-heeled sandals, and a light cashmere wrap. No ostentatious jewelry, just the quiet elegance of my wedding band and a pair of pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandaunt. This wasn't about making a statement of defiance, but one of quiet, unshakable presence. When the car pulled up to the marina, the late morning sun glinted off the polished chrome of countless luxury vessels. The air smelled of salt, diesel, and the faint, sweet scent of blooming jasmine from a nearby trellis. The Oriana was moored at the far end of the VIP dock, her white hull gleaming, her lines elegant and timeless. As I stepped out of the car, my small, sturdy suitcase rolling smoothly beside me, I saw them. Valora, clipboard in hand, was orchestrating the final boarding arrangements, her voice carrying clearly across the water, a melodic but unmistakably authoritative tone. Ophelia stood beside her, observing with a regal air. Lyle was there too, slightly apart from the main group, his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on some distant point on the horizon. Valora looked up, her eyes scanning the arrivals, and then she saw me. For a fleeting instant, her composed expression faltered. A flicker of something unreadable, surprise, annoyance, perhaps even a hint of apprehension, crossed her face before her professional mask slipped smoothly back into place. Ophelia's reaction was more subtle, a slight stiffening of her posture, a fractional narrowing of her eyes. Lyle didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence, his profile still turned towards the sea. I didn't falter. I continued my steady approach, the rhythmic click of my suitcase wheels on the wooden planks the only sound that seemed to register in the sudden lull. The small cluster of Preston family members and their guests around Valora seemed to subtly shift, an almost imperceptible closing of ranks, a silent, instinctual barrier forming. I stopped a few feet away, offered no greeting, no forced smile, just a calm, direct gaze that met Valora's, then Ophelia's, before moving past them towards the Oriana's gangway. Their collective silence was palpable, a heavy blanket in the sunlit air. A uniformed crew member, a woman with kind eyes and a professional demeanor, stepped forward as I reached the ramp. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Preston Wells," she said, her voice warm and respectful. She glanced at the manifest in her hand, then back at me, a subtle nod of recognition. "We're pleased to have you with us. The owner is now on board." The words, though spoken softly, seemed to resonate across the dock. The owner. Not a guest, not Mr. Preston's wife. The owner. I didn't need to turn around to imagine the expressions on the faces behind me. The crew member's voice dropped slightly, for my ears alone. "Captain Hayes asked me to inform you that we are ready to depart at your signal, ma'am." I met her gaze, a small, grateful smile touching my lips. "Thank you, Maria. Please inform Captain Hayes we may proceed when ready." She nodded. "Very good, ma'am." I stepped onto the polished teak deck of the Oriana, the familiar scent of saltwater and beeswax a comforting balm. I paused for a moment, gripping the smooth mahogany railing, and looked out at the shimmering expanse of Seabrook Cove. The water was calm, reflecting the endless blue sky, patient and indifferent to human dramas. This was the peace I had always associated with the Oriana, a peace I was determined to reclaim. The gentle hum of the engines starting beneath my feet was a quiet affirmation. As the yacht began to glide smoothly away from the dock, the figures on shore receding, I felt not a sense of triumph, but a profound, quiet settling within myself. I was not a guest here. I was not an interloper. I was home. The initial hours aboard the Oriana were marked by a carefully orchestrated politeness. Valora, after a brief, strained moment of eye contact when I'd entered the main salon, avoided me with practiced ease. She flitted amongst her chosen guests, her laughter a little too bright, her gestures a little too animated, as if to compensate for the unspoken tension that hung in the air. Lyle kept a reserved distance, engaging in muted conversations, his gaze often drifting towards me with a mixture of apprehension and something I couldn't quite decipher. I found a quiet corner on the aft deck, the gentle sea breeze ruffling my hair, and settled with a book I had no real intention of reading. My purpose was not to engage or confront, but simply to be present, to occupy my space with a quiet dignity that needed no external validation. Callista, a freelance journalist and an old friend from my university days, whom I'd quietly invited knowing her discretion and sharp observational skills might prove insightful, found me there. She wasn't a Preston insider, but she understood nuance. "Remarkable entrance," she murmured, settling beside me, her eyes twinkling. The air fairly crackled. I smiled faintly. "I'm merely enjoying the sea air, Callista." Later, Valora gathered a small group on the upper sun deck for what appeared to be an impromptu social media live stream. Her voice, amplified slightly by her phone, drifted down to where Callista and I Saturday. "Hello, all my lovely followers," she chirped, her face artfully arranged in a welcoming smile. "Just wanted to share a little piece of paradise with you all. We're embarking on our annual Preston family voyage, a tradition so dear to our hearts. There's truly nothing like the embrace of the open ocean to remind one of what truly matters: family, heritage, and the enduring bonds that tie us together." Her gaze swept panoramically across the glittering sea. "The people who share this journey with us, well, they're the keepers of our flame, the ones who understand the profound responsibility of nurturing a legacy, of building something beautiful that will last for generations to come." Just then, Maria, the crew member who had welcomed me aboard, walked past in the background of Valora's shot, carrying a tray of refreshments. Unaware, or perhaps acutely aware, of the live recording, she paused near Valora and said, in a clear, pleasant voice, "Excuse me, Mrs. Preston. Will Mrs. Preston Wells, the owner, be joining you for appetizers on the sun deck, or shall I serve her on the aft deck?" The camera didn't move, but Valora's smile froze, her eyes widening almost imperceptibly. A beat of stunned silence hung in the digital air, broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against the hull. Comments began to flood Valora's live feed. "Wait, who is Mrs. Preston Wells? Did she say owner? Plot twist." Valora fumbled with her phone, her composure momentarily shattered, before abruptly ending the stream. Callista suppressed a smile, her fingers already flying across her own device. "That," she said, "is what we call an unscripted moment of truth." Valora found me a short while later, her usual serene expression replaced by a tight, strained mask. "That was a deliberate stunt, wasn't it?" she hissed, her voice low and furious. I regarded her calmly. "What was a stunt, Valora?" "A crew member performing her duties with professionalism and courtesy. Don't feign innocence, Marjorie." "You orchestrated that." I set down my teacup. "I simply allowed you to share your narrative, Valora. If the truth proved disruptive to that narrative, perhaps the issue lies not with the truth, but with the story you were attempting to tell. You don't belong here. You never have." Her voice trembled slightly. I rose slowly, meeting her gaze without animosity, but with an unyielding firmness. "That's where you're mistaken, Valora. I don't need to belong. I own my place here in every sense of the word." She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, for a long moment before turning sharply and stalking away. I returned to my cabin, a quiet stillness settling over me. I opened the manila folder, not to reread its contents, but simply to see them, to feel the weight of their truth. I was not angry. I was, at last, anchored. Dinner that evening was served in the Oriana's elegant dining salon. The table was exquisitely set, candlelight glinting on polished silver and crystal, a testament to Valora's meticulous attention to detail. Yet an undercurrent of unease permeated the otherwise opulent atmosphere. Conversation was stilted, forced. I remained largely silent, observing the subtle shifts in dynamics, the averted gazes, the overly bright smiles. When dessert, a delicate lavender panna cotta, had been served, Valora rose, her composure seemingly restored, though a faint flush still colored her cheeks. "I'd like to propose a toast," she began, her voice smooth and practiced. "To family, to tradition, and to the enduring Preston legacy. It is through the dedication of those who truly understand and honor our heritage that these precious moments are made possible. To those who contribute, who uphold, who belong." Her gaze conspicuously avoided me, but the pointedness of her words was unmistakable. A polite murmur of agreement followed. I waited until the glasses were lowered, until a fragile quiet had settled once more. Then, without hurry, I rose. All eyes turned to me. "If I may," I said, my voice calm and clear, "I'd like to add a small contribution to this discussion of legacy and belonging." Valora's hand, holding her champagne flute, tightened. Lyle looked at me, his expression a mixture of apprehension and dawning realization. I reached into the simple leather satchel at my side, the manila folder's more elegant cousin for the evening, and retrieved a single, neatly folded document. I placed it gently in the center of the table. "This," I explained, my voice steady, "is a transcript of a conversation that took place last month. A planning call regarding this very trip between Valora and the Preston family's legal counsel." My finger rested on a highlighted passage. Several guests leaned forward, their curiosity piqued. "She is not, by blood, a Preston," I read aloud, my voice devoid of inflection. "Her primary ownership of a significant family asset like the Oriana presents a complication to the narrative we wish to preserve." A stunned silence fell over the table. Valora's face was ashen. "And yet," I continued, placing a second document beside the first, "this is the original purchase agreement for the Oriana. The initial capital investment, the down payment, and the majority of the financing originated solely from my personal funds. My name, Marjorie Ellingson Wells, is listed as the primary investor and co-owner." Lyle opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, his gaze fixed on the papers. "I share this not to incite drama," I said, my voice softening slightly, "but because I am weary of being discussed in hushed tones, of having my contributions minimized or erased in rooms I am not invited to enter. For years, I have chosen silence in the face of countless small exclusions, dismissive comments, and conveniently forgotten invitations. But my silence, I now understand, was misconstrued as acceptance, perhaps even as weakness." I paused, looking around the table, meeting the eyes of each person in turn. "This is no longer about seeking inclusion. It is about claiming visibility. It is about honoring the truth of my own story." Lyle's voice, when he finally spoke, was strained. "Valora." I had no idea the extent. "Why?" Valora stammered. I was merely trying to protect the family's image, the integrity of our traditions." "I didn't think. You thought I would remain silent." I finished for her, my tone gentle but unwavering. "And for a long time, you were correct." A cousin coughed discreetly into her napkin. Ophelia, for the first time that evening, looked genuinely unsettled, her regal composure faltering. Harold Vance, a longtime family friend whom I respected, cleared his throat. "Marjorie," he said, his voice thoughtful, "I believe many of us have, perhaps, been presented with a somewhat curated version of certain family histories." Several others nodded in quiet agreement. I looked at Valora, whose gaze was now fixed on her untouched panna cotta. "You are free to construct whatever narrative brings you comfort, Valora," I said. "But you may no longer build it upon the erasure of my name or my truth." With that, I gathered my papers, a quiet dignity in my movements, and excused myself from the table. The only sound that followed me was the gentle murmur of the waves against the Oriana's hull, a soothing, timeless rhythm. The remainder of the voyage passed in a haze of subdued interactions. There were no further confrontations, no dramatic pronouncements. Valora retreated into a quiet, almost brittle composure, her usual ebullience noticeably absent. Lyle sought me out the following morning, his expression etched with a remorse that felt, for the first time, truly genuine. "Marjorie," he began, his voice low, "I have been a coward. I saw the patterns, the subtle exclusions, Valora's manipulations. I told myself it was easier to keep the peace, to not rock the boat. But in doing so, I allowed your peace to be compromised, repeatedly. I failed you. And I am profoundly sorry." He spoke of his own insecurities, his fear of disrupting the family's carefully maintained facade, his regret at not championing me, his wife, with the strength and conviction I deserved. It wasn't an excuse, but an explanation, raw and vulnerable. I listened, my heart aching with a mixture of old hurts and a nascent, fragile hope. There were no easy resolutions, no swift forgiveness, but it was a beginning. A shared acknowledgement of a painful truth. Other family members, in their own ways, offered quiet gestures of recalibration. Aunt Beatrice, during a quiet moment on deck, squeezed my hand and whispered, "You have more steel in your spine, child, than I ever gave you credit for. Your grandaunt would be proud." Chloe, Lyle's niece, approached me with a shy smile and asked if I might, sometime, share stories of my grandaunt, the woman whose legacy had, in part, made the Oriana possible. These small moments, unforced and sincere, began to mend the frayed edges of my spirit. On our final evening at sea, as the Oriana charted a course back towards Seabrook Cove, I stood alone on the foremost deck, the wind whipping gently through my hair. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of rose and lavender, the water a vast, shimmering canvas of reflected light. I felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet strength that emanated from deep within. It was not the peace of resignation, but the peace of self-acceptance, of having spoken my truth with clarity and grace. The folder of documents, my collection of quiet truths, remained in my cabin, its purpose served. The battle I had fought was not against others, but for myself, for the right to be seen, to be acknowledged, to occupy my own space without apology. Back home, in the familiar comfort of our sunlit kitchen, life began to resume its gentle rhythm, yet everything felt subtly, irrevocably changed. Lyle was more present, more attentive, his actions reflecting a newfound respect and understanding. We spoke openly, honestly, about the future, about the kind of partnership we both truly desired, one built on mutual support and unwavering integrity. A few weeks later, Valora sent a brief, carefully worded email. It wasn't an apology, not directly, but it acknowledged, in her own oblique way, the misunderstandings and expressed a desire for a more harmonious family dynamic moving forward. I replied with a simple, courteous acknowledgement. Reconciliation, if it were to come, would be a slow, gradual process, built on changed behavior, not just words. My real healing, however, came not from their validation, but from my own. I started a small journal, not of grievances, but of gratitudes, of small moments of beauty and connection. I reconnected with old friends, like Callista, who had always seen and valued me for who I was. I found joy in simple pleasures, the scent of herbs from my garden, the warmth of the sun on my face, the quiet companionship of a good book. One afternoon, sorting through papers in my grandaunt's antique chest, I found a small, handwritten note I'd never seen before, tucked inside an old poetry book. Her familiar, elegant script read, "My dearest Marjorie, never allow anyone else to write your story. Your voice is precious, your light unique. Own it. Shine it. The world will be better for it." Tears welled in my eyes, tears not of sadness, but of profound, heartfelt recognition. She had known. She had understood. The Oriana remained a part of our lives, but its meaning had shifted. It was no longer a symbol of contested legacy, but a sanctuary of peace, a place where I felt truly anchored, truly myself. Lyle and I even discussed changing her name, but decided against it. The Oriana had weathered her own storm, and emerged, like me, with her true identity reaffirmed. The journey had been arduous, the lessons painful, but the destination, a quiet, unshakable sense of self-worth, a commitment to living authentically, and the courage to establish and maintain healthy boundaries, was invaluable. I learned that true belonging comes not from fitting into spaces defined by others, but from creating spaces where your own soul can flourish. And sometimes, the most powerful statements are made not with a shout, but with the quiet, unwavering resonance of your own truth. The sea, in its vastness and its calm, had taught me that, and I carried its wisdom in my heart, a gentle, enduring tide.